Welcome back to Fate Library. Today, we're diving into a massive 1.3-hour epic where the ultimate villain is forced to play the ultimate hero. If you love overpowered main characters, system glitches, and ruthless revenge, you're in the right place. Grab some snacks, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Now, let's get into the story. Blood dripped from the jagged edges of the obsidian throne. Kaelen, the undisputed demon king who had conquered the abyss and brought the human realm to its knees, sat paralyzed. 4 blades pierced his chest, pinning him to the very throne he had built with the bones of his enemies. He coughed up black blood, his crimson eyes narrowing as he looked at the 4 figures standing before him. They weren't human heroes, they weren't righteous paladins, they were his own generals, the 4 demon lords. Why? Kaelen's voice was a raspy growl that made the throne room tremble. The First Lord, a towering behemoth of shadows, sneered. You grew soft, Kaelen. You conquered the world, but you refused to slaughter the remaining humans. You wanted to rule, we want to consume. You, parasitic worms, Kaelen spat, feeling his life force draining away. The system interface, a holographic blood-red screen that had guided him to supremacy, began to violently glitch in his vision. Warning, vitality reaching 0%. Warning, host is dying. Goodbye, your majesty, the Second Lord mocked, twisting her blade deeper into his heart. Kaelen's vision faded to black. The absolute peak of power, the man who had brought the gods to a standstill, died not in a blaze of glory against a righteous hero, but like a dog in the dark, betrayed by the very monsters he had raised from the dirt. But as the darkness consumed him, a final, blinding system notification pierced the void. Critical error. Demon King authority cannot be extinguished. Activating emergency protocol, temporal regression. Cost 99.9% of host's demonic core. Rewinding time, 10 years. Kaelen gasped, his lungs burning as if he had just inhaled fire. His eyes snapped open, expecting to see the cold, obsidian ceiling of his throne room. Instead, he saw a dreary, gray sky pouring rain down on a filthy cobblestone alleyway. He scrambled to his feet, slipping in the mud. He looked at his hands. They were pale, thin, and entirely devoid of the terrifying claws and dark scales he had possessed for centuries. He touched his chest. No stab wounds. I'm human, Kaelen whispered, staring at a puddle on the ground. Reflected back at him was the face of a scrawny, exhausted young man. He remembered this face. This was him, exactly 10 years ago, right before the Great Cataclysm truly tore the world apart, back when he was nothing more than a starving orphan struggling to survive in the slums of the Holy Empire. Suddenly, a familiar ping echoed in his mind, but instead of the blood-red interface of his peak, a fractured, glitching window appeared. System reboot complete. Welcome, user, Kaelen, class, Demon King, sealed. Kaelen started laughing. It started as a low chuckle and evolved into a manic, unhinged cackle that echoed through the empty alley. He had regressed. The system had actually thrown him back in time. The 4 demon lords were currently nothing but low-level lackeys biding their time in the abyss. They hadn't gained their power yet. You absolute fools, Kaelen smiled. You sent me back. I know every dungeon. I know every hidden artifact. I will build an army so terrifying that by the time you realize what's happening, I will mount your heads on the walls of the abyss. But his triumphant monologue was cut brutally short. Heavy, armored footsteps splashed through the alleyway. Kaelen froze. 3 massive men clad in gleaming silver armor rounded the corner. They bore the crest of the Golden Sun, the vanguard knights of the Holy Guild. In Kaelen's past life, these were his mortal enemies. The lead knight, a man with a scarred face, pointed a glowing broadsword directly at Kaelen's throat. You there, rat. The Empire has issued the mandatory conscription order. All able-bodied citizens of the slums are to be tested for holy affinity. Come quietly or be purged. Kaelen's mind raced. In his past life, he had hidden from this exact draft. If he fought a fully leveled holy knight at level 1, he would be slaughtered instantly. I submit, Kaelen said, dropping his head and putting on the most pathetic, terrified expression he could muster. I will serve the light. Kaelen was tossed into the back of a heavily armored carriage, along with dozens of other terrified slum dwellers. As the carriage bumped along the cobblestone streets toward the Holy Guild's massive cathedral, Kaelen analyzed his situation. His Demon King system was still active, but his stats were pitiful. Furthermore, the system warned him of a severe penalty. Warning: host is surrounded by high-density holy mana. Prolonged exposure will cause cellular degradation. He was literally a demon trapped in a human body, walking directly into the headquarters of the world's most fanatical demon hunters. If they scanned him and detected his core, he would be tied to a stake and burned alive within the hour. But as he looked around at the towering spires of the holy cathedral, a twisted, brilliant plan began to form in his mind. To defeat his betrayers, he needed an army. What better army than the very zealots who were bred to fight demons? If he could infiltrate the Holy Guild, rise through their ranks, and take control of them from the inside, he could use humanity's strongest shield as his own personal sword. The irony was simply too delicious to pass up. But first, he had to survive the awakening ceremony. The recruits were lined up in the grand hall of the cathedral. At the center of the room sat the sun tier, a massive, glowing golden crystal floating above a marble pedestal. The high priest, an arrogant man draped in white robes, looked down at the slum recruits with obvious disgust. "Place your hand upon the sun tier," the high priest droned. "If the light finds you worthy, you shall be granted a holy class. If you harbor darkness, the tier will burn it out of you, fatally." One by one, the recruits stepped up. A few harbored minor dark curses from the slums and screamed in agony as the crystal scorched their hands, promptly being dragged away by the knights. Kaelen was the last in line. His heart pounded against his ribs. He was the former Demon King. His very soul was saturated in the abyss. System warning: lethal holy energy detected ahead. Contact will result in instantaneous annihilation. "Shut up and calculate a bypass," Kaelen ordered the system in his mind. "Calculating? Error. Holy energy is absolute." "Then don't block it, devour it." Kaelen stepped up to the pedestal. The high priest sneered. "Make it quick, rat." Kaelen reached out and placed his palm flat against the glowing golden crystal. For a microsecond, an agonizing surge of pure holy fire shot up his arm, attempting to vaporize his demonic core. But then, Kaelen's sealed system reacted violently. A black hole opened within his mana circuits. Emergency override. Skill gluttony of the abyss activated, absorbing hostile energy, converting holy energy into demonic mana, inverting visual output to prevent detection. Suddenly, the sun tier didn't just glow, it erupted. A blinding, deafening pillar of pure white light blasted from the crystal, shattering the stained glass windows of the cathedral and shooting straight into the heavens. The entire building shook as if hit by an earthquake. The holy knights fell to their knees, blinded by the sheer intensity of the light. The high priest fell backward, trembling in absolute shock. This is impossible, such purity, such overwhelming divine presence. In the center of the light, Kaelen stood perfectly still. He felt like he was drowning in raw power, but to the outside world, he looked like a descending angel. The system pinged rapidly. Holy energy completely devoured. Demon King core stabilized. Due to absorbing a legendary holy artifact, a unique camouflage skill has been generated. Skill acquired. Facade of the Saint, passive. As the light finally faded, the sun tier, a priceless artifact that had lasted for centuries, crumbled into gray dust. Kaelen lowered his hand, panting heavily. He looked at the high priest, making sure to keep his expression one of innocent confusion. Did I do it right?" Kaelen asked, blinking innocently. The high priest scrambled to his feet, grabbed Kaelen's dirty hands, and kissed them. "A miracle. The goddess has sent us a miracle. You possess the highest holy affinity in recorded history. You are the saint of the sword." Kaelen had to bite the inside of his cheek to stop himself from bursting into maniacal laughter. The absolute fools. He had just eaten their most sacred relic to feed his demonic core, and they were worshipping him for it. Because of his miraculous awakening, Kaelen was instantly promoted from a disposable slum recruit to an elite cadet. However, the Holy Guild wasn't stupid. They needed to test if his combat ability matched his spiritual affinity. The very next day, Kaelen found himself standing before the entrance of the Catacombs of Purgatory, an E-rank tutorial dungeon used exclusively to train new recruits. He was dressed in a pristine white uniform, wielding a standard-issue blessed iron sword. Surrounding him were a dozen other cadets, all of whom were staring at him with a mix of awe and deep jealousy. The instructor, a scarred veteran paladin named Garrick, unlocked the heavy iron doors of the dungeon. "Listen up, maggots. This is an E-rank zone. It is filled with low-level undead. Your objective is to reach the core room and cleanse it. Saint Kaelen here may have a high affinity, but affinity doesn't mean anything if you can't swing a sword. Enter." Kaelen gripped his iron sword. It felt disgustingly light and fragile compared to his old demonic greatsword. As the group ventured into the dark, damp catacombs, the air grew cold. Skeletons began to rise from the dirt walls, their eye sockets glowing with pale blue fire. The cadets panicked, swinging their weapons wildly. Kaelen, however, moved with a terrifying, practiced efficiency. He didn't use any mana. He didn't need to. He had centuries of combat experience. He casually sidestepped a skeleton's rusty blade, parried a second strike, and drove his iron sword straight through a skull, shattering it instantly. "Impressive," Instructor Garrick muttered from the rear, watching Kaelen tear through the undead without breaking a sweat. His instincts are sharper than a veteran's. But Kaelen was bored. "Level up," the notification pinged. He had reached level 2. The stats gained were negligible. "At this rate, it will take me a decade just to reach a fraction of my old power," Kaelen thought. But then, the air in the catacombs suddenly changed. The pale blue fires in the skeleton's eyes flickered and turned a violent, sickening purple. The temperature dropped below freezing. Instructor Garrick's eyes widened in horror. "Wait, this isn't right. The mana density. It's spiking." The stone doors behind them slammed shut with a deafening boom, locking them inside. A deep, guttural roar echoed from the depths of the dungeon. From the shadows of the core room, a massive creature stepped forward. It stood 10 feet tall, its body a mass of twisted, rotten flesh and pulsating purple veins. "Warning, dungeon mutation detected. Boss monster altered. Entity, blood-gorged flesh golem, demon type rank, C rank." "A C rank demon in a tutorial dungeon," Garrick screamed, drawing his broadsword. "Fall back, all cadets fall back immediately, it's a trap." But it was too late. The flesh golem moved with terrifying speed. It swung its massive cleaver, generating a shockwave of dark mana that threw Garrick against the wall, shattering his ribs and knocking him unconscious instantly. The remaining cadets screamed in absolute terror as the demon raised its cleaver to butcher them. Kaelen stood in the center of the chaos, perfectly calm. He looked at the flesh golem. He recognized the specific signature of the purple mana. "Ah," Kaelen thought, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. "That mana signature. This golem is a subordinate of the third demon lord. One of my betrayers. They are already seeding the human dungeons with their traps." A cadet beside Kaelen fell to his knees, sobbing. "We're going to die. The saint can't save us. He's only level 1. Kaelen sighed. He couldn't kill a C-rank demon with just swordplay and a flimsy iron blade. He needed to use magic. He needed to use his demonic aura. But if he did, he would expose himself as a demon to the surviving cadets. Then he remembered his new passive skill, Facade of the Saint. All demonic actions would register as holy energy. "Let's test this," Kaelen thought. He stepped forward, placing himself between the crying cadets and the towering flesh golem. He raised his blessed iron sword, pointing it directly at the beast. "System," Kaelen commanded in his mind. "Unlock 1% of the sealed demonic core. Skill, Hellfire Annihilation. Warning, activating demonic skill. Passive skill, Facade of the Saint, automatically applying visual and sensory camouflage." The air pressure in the room vanished. The flesh golem paused, its primal instincts suddenly screaming in absolute terror. It looked down at the tiny human holding the iron sword. A pitch-black aura erupted from Kaelen's core, the condensed, murderous malice of the Demon King. But the moment the aura left his body, the Facade of the Saint triggered. The jet-black energy was instantly inverted. To the cadets, it didn't look like demonic malice. It looked like the most radiant, blinding, overwhelmingly pure holy light they had ever seen. Kaelen swung his sword downwards. What was actually a wave of destructive hellfire shot forward, cloaked entirely in a shell of golden divine energy. The attack slammed into the flesh golem. The C-rank demon didn't even have time to scream. The attack continued forward, carving a massive, glowing trench through the dungeon floor and completely obliterating the back wall of the catacombs, revealing the outside sky. Silence fell over the cavern. Dust settled. The C-rank demon was simply gone, erased. The surviving cadets stared at Kaelen, their jaws slacked in absolute, worshipping disbelief. They had just witnessed a level 1 recruit one-shot a C-rank boss with a single swing. "By the gods," one cadet whispered, weeping tears of joy, "he really is the chosen one, the saint of the sword." Kaelen turned back to look at them. He sheathed his cracked iron sword and offered them a warm, gentle, reassuring smile. He looked like the very picture of a heroic savior. But behind the blinding facade of holy light, his crimson eyes burned with a dark, sinister promise. Yes, Kaelen thought, looking at his new, devoted followers. "Worship me, trust me. Because when the time comes, I am going to use every single one of you fools to burn this world down." The colossal iron gates of the holy capital, Celeria, loomed ahead like a fortress built by the gods themselves. Normally, a slum rat like Kaelen wouldn't even be allowed to look at the outer walls. But today, the massive gates were thrown wide open. Thousands of citizens lined the cobblestone streets, tossing white rose petals as Kaelen's armored carriage rolled through. News of what happened in the E-rank tutorial dungeon had spread like wildfire. A level 1 recruit had annihilated a mutated C-rank demon with a single, devastating swing of holy light. To the Holy Empire, it wasn't just a victory. It was a divine prophecy fulfilled. Inside the carriage, Kaelen slouched against the velvet cushions, thoroughly bored. The system interface hovered in front of him, invisible to the 2 elite paladins guarding him. Current status: Name, Kaelen. Class, Demon King sealed. Level, 5. Available stat points, 20. He had gained 4 levels from the residual energy of the C-rank flesh golem. He dumped all 20 points into intelligence, expanding his mana pool. Physical strength was useless right now. He needed raw magical output if he was going to fake being a high-tier paladin. "Nervous, Saint Kaelen?" one of the paladins asked, his voice filled with reverence. "Just overwhelmed by the light's grace," Kaelen lied smoothly, offering a practiced, humble smile. The carriage finally halted before the Grand Sanctum, the very heart of the Holy Guild. Kaelen was escorted into a massive, vaulted chamber. Sitting at the end of a long marble table was Guildmaster Valerius. The man was a legend, a level 90 paladin who had slain dragons and supposedly leveled mountains. In Kaelen's past life, Valerius had been a massive thorn in his side, leading a crusade that wiped out 3 of Kaelen's demonic legions. Valerius's piercing blue eyes locked onto Kaelen. "The Saint of the Sword. They say your light is so pure it instantly vaporized a C-rank demon." Valerius stood up, his massive, gold-plated armor clanking. He drew his personal weapon, a legendary sword named Dawnbreaker. "Words are cheap. Let us see this purity." Without warning, Valerius swung the legendary sword directly at Kaelen's head. A shockwave of suffocating holy pressure filled the room. The 2 paladins guarding Kaelen fell to their knees, gasping for air. It was a test, a brutal, lethal test of faith. If Kaelen harbored even a sliver of darkness, Dawnbreaker would instantly react and execute him. Kaelen didn't flinch, he didn't even draw his weapon. He simply stood there and let the system do the work. Warning, legendary holy weapon detected. Passive skill, Facade of the Saint, operating at maximum output. Inverting demonic signature. The blade stopped a millimeter from Kaelen's neck, but it didn't burn him. Instead, the golden blade began to hum violently, resonating with the overwhelming purity radiating from Kaelen. The holy aura surrounding Dawnbreaker actually bent towards Kaelen, as if submitting to a higher authority. Valerius's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Dawnbreaker had never submitted to anyone but him. He slowly lowered the blade, his stern expression melting into absolute awe. "Forgive my insolence, Saint," Valerius bowed deeply, a level 90 guildmaster submitting to a level 5 recruit. The rumors were true. Your affinity transcends human limits. The guild is yours to command. Kaelen had to suppress a wicked grin. Too easy, he thought. I am merely a servant, guildmaster, Kaelen said softly. But I feel a dark tide rising. The incident in the tutorial dungeon. Demons are encroaching on our borders. I wish to form a squad to hunt them. Valerius nodded firmly. Of course. As the saint, you are immediately granted the rank of Inquisitor Captain. You may select any elite knights from our vanguard to form your personal retinue. No, Kaelen interrupted smoothly. The vanguard knights are needed here to protect the capital. I wish to look elsewhere. The light teaches us about redemption, does it not? I want to visit the Tartarus block. Valerius gasped, his face paling. The Tartarus block? Saint Kaelen, those are the rejects. Heretics, murderers, those cursed with unstable mana. They are kept in the underground prison because they are beyond saving. It is too dangerous. No one is beyond saving in the eyes of the light, Kaelen said, layering his voice with a subtle demonic charm that the system translated as a divine command. Valerius hesitated but ultimately bowed. As you wish, Saint. The Tartarus block was a nightmare. Located deep beneath the Holy Cathedral, it was a damp, rotting dungeon where the guild threw anyone who didn't fit their perfect, righteous mold. The stench of blood and despair was heavy in the air. Kaelen walked down the dimly lit corridor, ignoring the agonizing screams echoing from the interrogation cells. He wasn't here to save anyone. He was here to recruit monsters. He needed soldiers who were ruthless, shunned by society, and willing to do whatever it took to survive. He needed people who hated the Holy Guild as much as he did. He stopped in front of a heavily reinforced cell. Inside, chained to the wall by thick, glowing anti-magic cuffs, was a young woman with ragged black hair and fiercely glowing purple eyes. System scan complete. Target, Ilera. Class, Shadow Mage, corrupted. Level, 15. Status, sentenced to execution tomorrow for possessing illegal dark mana. Ilera glared up at Kaelen's pristine white uniform. Come to gloat, holy man, or are you here to light the pyre yourself? Kaelen stepped into the cell. He didn't speak. Instead, he raised a hand and snapped his fingers. Activating skill, Demonic Severance. The glowing anti-magic cuffs instantly shattered into a million pieces. Ilera collapsed to the floor, coughing, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at her freed wrists, then up at Kaelen. What did you just do? She whispered. Those were forged by the High Priest. The High Priest is an idiot, Kaelen replied casually, his voice dropping the polite, saintly tone. His crimson eyes flared behind his disguise. You possess shadow magic. In this pathetic empire, they call it a curse, but I call it a weapon. I am forming a squad, Ilera, join me, and I won't just save your life. I'll show you how to turn that shadow into an absolute nightmare. Ilera hesitated, sensing an unnatural, suffocating pressure radiating from the supposed saint. It felt like standing before an apex predator. Why me? She asked. Because you have hate in your eyes, Kaelen smiled warmly, and I have a lot of things I need you to hate for me. Over the next hour, Kaelen moved through the Tartarus block. He didn't pick the strong, honorable prisoners. He handpicked the most volatile, ruthless rejects the guild had to offer. He recruited a berserker who had slaughtered his corrupt commanding officer. He recruited a disgraced assassin who had been caught stealing guild funds to feed orphans. He recruited a half-beastman archer who had been imprisoned simply for his bloodline. In total, he gathered 5 outcasts. They stood before him in the center of the prison block, confused, battered, and suspicious. You're all officially dead, Kaelen announced, pacing in front of them. As far as the guildmaster knows, I have taken you under my wing to purify your souls through a suicide mission. But let me be perfectly clear. Kaelen's passive facade of the saint dropped for exactly 1 second. The air in the room instantly froze. The 5 outcasts dropped to their knees, physically crushed by the sheer, crushing weight of Kaelen's raw demonic aura. It was a malice so thick and ancient that it felt like the world was ending. I am not a saint, Kaelen whispered, the demonic resonance vibrating in their skulls. I am going to tear this empire and everything beyond it down to its foundations. You work for me now. If you betray me, I won't kill you. I will make sure you wish you had died in these cells." The aura vanished. The golden, holy facade returned instantly. Kaelen clapped his hands together with a bright, cheerful smile. "So, who's ready to go hunt some demons?" The outcasts stared at him in sheer, absolute terror. But slowly, one by one, they nodded. They didn't have a choice. They had just sold their souls to the devil himself. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in the desolate, ash-covered lands of the abyss, a massive fortress carved from black volcanic rock pierced the sky. Inside the central war room, a towering demon clad in spiked armor slammed his fist onto a stone table, shattering it. This was Malakar, the third demon lord. The very general who would, in 10 years, plunge a blade into Kaelen's back. But right now, Malakar was still young, building his territory and plotting his ascension. "What do you mean the C-rank flesh golem was destroyed?" Malakar roared, his voice shaking the fortress. A trembling imp bowed furiously on the floor. "My lord, the scout. It was annihilated in a human tutorial dungeon, by a single strike." "A tutorial dungeon?" Malakar sneered. "Impossible, only low-level human trash go there. Was it a guildmaster, a trap?" "No, my lord," the imp squeaked. "Our spies report it was a level 1 recruit. They are calling him the Saint of the Sword. The humans say his holy light is the purest ever recorded. He completely vaporized the golem in one hit." Malakar's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. A level 1 human capable of one-shotting his prized creation. If the humans had bred a monster like that, it could jeopardize his entire decade-long plan to invade the surface. "A saint, huh?" Malakar growled, summoning a massive, flaming battle-axe to his hand. "Send the bloodhounds to the borderlands. I want this saint found. I want him dragged to me alive. I'm going to peel off his holy skin and see just how pure he really is." Malakar turned to look at a massive map of the human continent, a cruel smile forming on his face. The pieces were set. The demon lord was preparing to hunt the saint. Little did he know, he was walking straight into the trap of the very king he was destined to betray. The journey to the Ashen Wastes took 3 brutal days. The landscape transitioned from the lush, golden fields of the Holy Empire into a desolate, gray nightmare where the sky was perpetually choked with ash. This was the borderland, the contested zone between humanity and the abyss. Kaelen rode at the head of the formation on a pristine white stallion provided by the guild. Behind him rode his newly formed squad, looking less like holy inquisitors and more like a band of desperate mercenaries. There was Alara, the corrupted shadow mage, whose wrists still bore the raw, red scars of the anti-magic cuffs. Beside her rode Jax, a massive, muscle-bound berserker wielding a greatsword that looked like a sharpened slab of iron. And bringing up the rear was Thorn, a half-beastman archer with wolf-like ears and piercing amber eyes that constantly scanned the horizon for threats. None of them had spoken a word to Kaelen since leaving the capital. The memory of his suffocating, demonic aura in the prison cell was still burned into their minds. They didn't know what he was, but they knew he wasn't a saint. Kaelen finally pulled his horse to a stop atop a ridge overlooking a ruined border village. Black smoke billowed from the shattered roofs. "We camp here," Kaelen announced, dismounting gracefully. Jax slammed his greatsword into the dirt and glared at Kaelen. "I'll ask what we're all thinking, Captain. The guildmaster sent us here to die, didn't he? A level 5 saint leading 3 rejects into a known demon hot zone. It's an execution." Kaelen smiled, walking over to the hulking berserker. "The guildmaster did send you here to die, Jax, but he didn't send me here to die. He thinks I'm going to purify this land and return a hero. And that is exactly what I'm going to do." Alara crossed her arms, dark mana flickering around her fingertips. "And where do we fit into this grand heroic tale?" "You," Kaelen said, his crimson eyes flashing, "are going to become the strongest monsters this world has ever seen. The Holy Guild teaches that leveling up requires prayer, meditation, and the blessing of the light. They say you must slowly purify mana over years of training." Kaelen stepped closer, dropping his voice into a chilling whisper. "They are lying. That is simply how you control livestock. If you want true power, you don't pray for it. You take it. You kill and you devour." Thorn's ears twitched violently. That That's the demonic method of progression. It's forbidden, it rots the soul. Your souls are already rotting in the eyes of the guild. Kaelen laughed, a cold, sharp sound. So, let's rot a little faster. Prepare your weapons, we have company. Before the squad could process his words, the shadows around the ruined village suddenly lengthened. The ambient temperature plummeted. Thorn drew an arrow with blinding speed, aiming at the tree line. In the trees, fast. 4 massive, lupin figures burst from the shadows. They were bloodhounds, elite, B-rank demon assassins loyal to the 3rd demon lord, Malakar. They moved on all 4s, their bodies sleek and covered in bone-plated armor, wielding jagged daggers dripping with paralyzing venom. Warning, elite demon ambush detected. Entities, Malakar's bloodhounds, B-rank. B-rank, Jax roared, swinging his greatsword. We're all below level 20, we can't fight these. The bloodhounds didn't hesitate. They coordinated flawlessly, moving like a single, lethal shadow. One lunged at Jax, easily ducking under his wild swing and slashing his thigh. Jax roared in pain as the venom instantly numbed his leg. Ilera threw a volley of shadow spikes, but a second hound deflected them with a flick of its wrist, closing the distance in a millisecond and kicking her brutally in the chest. She crashed into a ruined wall, gasping for breath. Thorn managed to pin one hound to a tree with an arrow through the shoulder, but the demon merely ripped the arrow out with a sickening crunch and lunged for the archer's throat. In less than 10 seconds, Kaelen's elite squad was completely overwhelmed. They were out-leveled, outskilled, and outmatched. The lead bloodhound, a scarred veteran, stalked toward Kaelen, who was simply watching the slaughter with a bored expression. "You are the one they call the saint?" the hound hissed, its voice like grinding stones. "Lord Malakar wants you alive, but he didn't say you needed all your limbs." Kaelen sighed. "I suppose this is an acceptable baseline. You 3, he pointed at his beaten squad, watch closely. This is how you actually fight." Kaelen raised his hand, but this time he didn't activate the facade of the saint. He didn't need to. They were far away from the guild's scrying eyes, deep in the wastes. System, deploy localized mana barrier. Isolate this coordinate. Deploying abyssal veil. External observation blocked. A dome of pitch-black energy instantly snapped over the battlefield, plunging the area into absolute darkness. The holy light radiating from Kaelen vanished entirely. The pristine white uniform seemed to turn as black as the void. The bloodhound froze. Its demonic instincts, honed over centuries of slaughter, suddenly screamed in unimaginable terror. The creature in front of it wasn't a human, it wasn't a saint. It was the king. Kaelen didn't draw a sword, he simply stepped forward. The sheer gravitational pressure of his unleashed demonic core forced the lead bloodhound to its knees. The concrete beneath the demon cracked. Malakar, the hound choked out, paralyzed by fear. "You, what are you?" "Malakar is a traitorous dog who doesn't know how to leash his mutts," Kaelen said softly, grabbing the hound by the throat and lifting the massive demon into the air with one hand. The other 3 bloodhounds tried to flee, abandoning their targets, but Kaelen didn't even look at them. He snapped his fingers. 3 spikes of condensed hellfire erupted from the ground, impaling the fleeing demons through the chest and pinning them in place. They screamed in agony as the dark fire burned their mana circuits. Kaelen tightened his grip on the laid hound's throat. "I'm going to leave you alive so you can deliver a message to your master. But first, you're going to pay a toll for boring me." Kaelen plunged his free hand directly into the hound's chest, bypassing armor and bone, and ripped out a chunk of the demon's glowing, purple core. The hound shrieked, collapsing to the ground in a violently convulsing heap. Kaelen walked over to Jax, who was staring in absolute horror. Kaelen shoved the pulsating, bloody chunk of the demon core directly into Jax's hands. "Eat it," Kaelen commanded. Jax hesitated, trembling. That's pure demonic essence. It'll mutate me." "It will make you strong," Kaelen corrected, his eyes glowing like twin crimson suns. "Eat it, or I'll feed you to them." Terrified, Jax brought the core to his mouth and took a bite. Instantly, his eyes rolled back in his head. The system went wild. Party member Jax has consumed a B-rank demon core. Forced evolution initiated. Level up. Level up. Level up. Jax's muscles bulged grotesquely before settling into a denser, darker mass. His iron greatsword began to absorb the ambient dark mana, turning pitch black. He roared, not in pain, but in absolute, intoxicating euphoria. He skyrocketed from level 12 to level 25 in a matter of seconds. Kaelen moved to the impaled demons. He ripped the cores out of two of them, tossing one to Alara and one to Thorn. Consume, Kaelen ordered. Having seen what happened to Jax, they didn't hesitate. Alara devoured the core, her shadow magic instantly mutating. Her corrupted mana solidified, forming a wicked, semi-sentient shadow cloak around her shoulders. She hit level 27. Thorn crushed the core and inhaled the essence. His amber eyes turned a terrifying, glowing crimson, and his senses expanded 100-fold. He could see the very flow of mana in the air. He hit level 26. The three outcasts stood up, radiating a dark, violent energy that rivaled the elite vanguard knights of the capital. They weren't rejects anymore. They were predators. Kaelen dismissed the abyssal veil, letting the dim, gray light of the ashen wastes filter back in. He reactivated Facade of the Saint, returning to his pristine, holy appearance. He walked over to the last surviving bloodhound, the leader he had spared. The demon was bleeding out, dragging itself across the dirt. Kaelen placed a polished white boot on the demon's head. Listen closely, Kaelen smiled, leaning down. Go back to Malakar. Tell him the Saint of the Sword has arrived at the border. Tell him I found his little ambush pathetic. And tell him. Kaelen leaned in closer, dropping his voice so only the demon could hear the ancient, abyssal dialect. Tell him the throne is still mine. The bloodhound's eyes widened in sheer, mind-breaking realization. It scrambled away, running into the wastelands as fast as its mangled legs could carry it. Kaelen turned back to his squad. They were looking at their own hands, vibrating with their newfound power. They looked at Kaelen, no longer with suspicion, but with a terrifying, fanatical devotion. Captain, Alara whispered, the shadows dancing around her fingertips. What are your orders? Kaelen looked toward the horizon, where the abyss met the human realm. We march forward. We find the biggest demon nest in this sector, and we eat everything inside. Far away in the obsidian fortress, Malakar sat upon his throne of skulls, sipping wine from a golden goblet. The heavy doors of the throne room burst open. The surviving bloodhound collapsed onto the floor, covered in blood, its core heavily damaged. Malakar frowned, crushing the goblet in his hand. You failed, against a single human recruit and 3 rejects. My lord, the hound gasped, coughing up black blood. He isn't human, the light. It's a lie. He used the abyssal veil. He ripped out our cores with his bare hands. Malakar stood up, his massive frame radiating intense heat. The abyssal veil? Impossible. Only the royal demon bloodline knows that magic. What did he say? Give me his exact words. The hound trembled, recounting the message. And when it repeated the final phrase, spoken in the ancient, royal dialect, Malakar's face drained of all color. The throne is still mine. Malakar stumbled back, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. He remembered those words. He remembered the exact tone. It was the tone Kaelen used right before he executed traitors. No, Malakar whispered, genuine terror creeping into his voice. He's dead. I watched him die. I drove my blade into his heart myself. But the evidence was right in front of him. A monster wearing a human skin, wielding absolute holy light as a disguise, and possessing the authority of the king. Mobilize the entire Northern Legion, Malakar roared, panic lacing his voice. Send the Death Knights, send the behemoths, I don't care how many it takes. Obliterate that entire sector. If he is who I think he is, we have to kill him before he levels up. The game had officially changed. The demon lord was no longer the hunter. He had just become the prey. The sky above the ashen wastes turned a violent, bruised purple. It wasn't a natural storm. It was the physical manifestation of thousands of demonic auras marching in unison. Malakar, terrified by the prospect of his former king's return, hadn't just sent a scouting party. He had unleashed the entire Northern Legion. 3,000 lesser demons, 200 armored behemoths, and a vanguard of 50 elite death knights rode across the shattered landscape. Their objective was simple: annihilate every living creature in Sector 4. They were to leave no stone unturned, no survivor breathing. Unfortunately for the Holy Guild, Sector 4 was the exact location of Fort Solis, a heavily fortified outpost manned by 500 vanguard knights. Inside the fort, panic was spreading. The outpost commander, a season-level 45 paladin named Kaelen, stood on the battlements and stared at the approaching sea of darkness. His hands shook as he gripped his telescope. "By the goddess," Kaelen whispered, his face completely pale. "This isn't a raid, it's an extermination force. Sound the alarm, send a distress signal to the capital immediately." A young squire ran up, tears streaming down his face. "Commander, the teleportation relays are jammed. The demon's ambient mana is too thick. We're completely cut off." Kaelen drew his longsword, knowing he was holding his own death warrant. "Then we hold the line. May the light have mercy on our souls." The demon army crashed into the walls of Fort Solis like a tsunami of shadows and steel. The behemoths, massive, hulking monstrosities, slammed their fists against the reinforced gates, shattering the holy wards with each strike. The vanguard knights fought valiantly, raining down holy arrows and spells, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Within 20 minutes, the outer wall was breached. Demons flooded the courtyard, slaughtering the knights. The screams of the dying echoed over the roar of the monsters. Commander Kaelen fought back-to-back with his men, covered in his own blood. A massive death knight rode toward him on a skeletal warhorse, raising a cursed lance. Kaelen closed his eyes, preparing for the end. But the end didn't come. Instead, a blinding pillar of pure white light blasted from the sky, crashing directly into the center of the demon horde. The impact was so intense it created a shockwave that vaporized a dozen lesser demons instantly. Kaelen opened his eyes and gasped. Standing in the crater, radiating an aura of overwhelming divine power, was a young man in a pristine white uniform. It was Kaelen, the Saint of the Sword. And standing behind him were three figures practically vibrating with raw, untamed energy. "The Saint," Kaelen shouted, tears of salvation welling in his eyes. "The goddess heard our prayers, we are saved." Kaelen turned to the battered commander and offered his signature, warm, heroic smile. "Hold your ground, Commander. The light is with you." But internally, Kaelen's system interface was flashing rapidly. Massive mana sources detected. 500 holy knights, high purity. 3,000 demons, corrupted essence. Calculating optimal harvest route. Why save them? Kaelen thought, looking at the cheering vanguard knights. They are the very zealots who hunted me in my past life. They are nothing but batteries. Kaelen raised his hand. System, deploy domain, Aegis of the false martyr. Deploying domain. Warning, facade of the saint, automatically applying camouflage. Domain will appear as a protective holy barrier to external observers. A massive dome of golden, shimmering light expanded from Kaelen, covering the entire courtyard of Fort Solis. The holy knights cheered even louder, believing the saint had cast an ultimate defensive spell to protect them from the demons. But it wasn't a defensive spell. It was a cage. Kaelen had just locked the demons and the holy knights inside a closed arena, preventing anyone from escaping. "Elara, Jax, Thorn," Kaelen commanded, his voice reaching his squad via a private telepathic link. "The knights think I'm protecting them. Let them fight the frontline demons. When a knight falls, do not save them. When a demon dies, consume its core. I want this entire battlefield picked clean. Am I understood?" "Yes, Captain," the three outcasts replied in unison, their eyes glowing with predatory hunger. The massacre began, but it wasn't a battle between good and evil. It was a one-sided slaughter orchestrator by a single man. Jax charged into the fray. The berserker swung his pitch-black greatsword, cleaving a massive behemoth in half. As the beast fell, Jax didn't even pause. He ripped the core from its chest and crushed it in his teeth, his muscles expanding further as the system pinged a level up. Elara stood on the battlements, her shadow magic forming a massive, multi-headed hydra of darkness. The holy knights were too busy fighting for their lives to notice that the saint squad was using forbidden dark arts. Elara's shadows impaled demons, draining their vitality and feeding it directly into her own mana pool. Thorn moved like a ghost, his amber eyes tracking every movement. His arrows, infused with demonic piercing energy, bypassed armor and bone, hitting critical weak points with impossible accuracy. Meanwhile, Kaelen stood in the center of the courtyard, perfectly still. He was pretending to focus on maintaining the holy barrier. In reality, he was using a much darker skill. Skill active, Soul Siphon. Every time a holy knight was killed by a demon, Kaelen secretly absorbed the residual pure holy mana, escaping their dying bodies. And every time a demon was killed by his squad, Kaelen absorbed the ambient dark mana. He was feeding on both sides of the war. Mana absorbed, Holy Core plus 2%. Demonic Core plus 5%. Level up. Level up. Help, a Vanguard Knight screamed, crawling toward Kaelen with a severed leg. A Death Knight loomed over him, raising its cursed blade. Saint, please. Kaelen looked down at the dying man with eyes that were utterly devoid of emotion. He didn't lift a finger. The Death Knight brought its blade down, ending the man's life. The moment the knight died, Kaelen absorbed his soul. Thank you for your service to the light, Kaelen mocked internally, feeling his mana pool expand. The Death Knight turned its hollow, glowing eyes toward Kaelen. It recognized the threat. The Saint was the anchor. The Death Knight spurred its skeletal horse, charging directly at Kaelen with the force of a battering ram. Die, human, the Death Knight roared, unleashing a wave of necrotic energy. Kaelen finally moved. He didn't draw his iron sword. He simply raised his bare hand and caught the tip of the Death Knight's cursed lance, stopping the massive charge dead in its tracks. The shockwave of the impact shattered the flagstones beneath them, but Kaelen didn't budge an inch. You dare point a weapon at your king? Kaelen whispered, dropping the facade of the saint, for just a fraction of a second. The Death Knight's necrotic aura instantly extinguished, overpowered by the sheer, crushing weight of Kaelen's true demonic aura. The undead creature trembled, its non-existent heart freezing in terror. It tried to pull its lance away, but Kaelen's grip was like an iron vice. Tell Malachar, Kaelen said, his eyes burning with crimson fire, that his army is pathetic, and that I am coming for his head. Kaelen squeezed his hand. The cursed lance shattered into 1,000 pieces. Before the Death Knight could react, Kaelen punched directly through its heavy dark iron armor, crushing its core in his fist. Critical hit. Elite Death Knight slain. Massive EXP gained. Level up, you have reached level 50. First milestone reached, unlocking domain skill, Throne of Bones. Kaelen smiled, level 50. He was finally regaining his true strength. 2 hours later, the battle was over. The sky cleared as the demonic aura dissipated. The courtyard of Fort Solis was an absolute graveyard. Of the 3,000 demons, not a single one survived. Of the 500 Vanguard Knights, only 30 remained alive, most of them heavily wounded and traumatized. But they were alive, and to them that was a miracle. Commander Kaelig, missing an arm and covered in soot, dropped to his knees before Kaelen. The surviving knights followed suit, bowing their heads in absolute reverence. You saved us, Kaelig wept, looking up at Kaelen as if he were looking at a god. We lost so many, but without your barrier, we would have all perished. The guild will sing of this day for 1,000 years. You truly are the savior. Kaelen looked at the kneeling, broken knights. He looked at the mountain of demon corpses his squad had slaughtered. His system was completely overflowing with both holy and demonic mana, perfectly balanced, making him stronger than he ever was at this level in his past life. He had used them, he had let their brothers die to feed his own power. And yet, here they were, worshipping the ground he walked on. We do not weep for the fallen, Commander, Kaelen said softly, placing a gentle, glowing hand on Kaelig's shoulder. They died in the light. Their sacrifice fueled our victory today. We must honor them by growing stronger. Elara, Jax, and Thorn stood in the background, covered in demon blood. Their levels had skyrocketed. Jax was pushing level 40. Elara was radiating an aura so dark she had to consciously suppress it. They looked at Kaelen and smirked. They knew the truth. They knew the Saint was the biggest monster on the battlefield. Kaelen turned his gaze toward the northern horizon, in the direction of Malachar's obsidian fortress. The third demon lord had sent an army to kill him, and Kaelen had used it as an all-you-can-eat buffet. Malachar would be panicking now. The other three betrayers, the first, second, and fourth lords, would soon catch wind of this anomaly. The board was set. The Demon King had his squad, he had his levels, and he had the absolute, unquestioning loyalty of the Holy Guild. It was time to take the war to the abyss. The bells of the holy capital rang out in a triumphant chorus that echoed for miles. It had been over a century since the Holy Guild had scored a decisive victory against the abyss, and today they had a reason to celebrate. Kaelen rode through the capital's central plaza, his pristine white uniform completely spotless. Behind him rode Jax, Alara, and Thorn. The three outcasts were no longer treated as rejects, they were hailed as the saints' chosen disciples. Dragged behind their horses were massive, enchanted nets containing the severed heads and shattered cores of 50 elite death knights. The citizens threw flowers, weeping with joy. The vanguard knights saluted. Even the haughty high priest bowed his head as Kaelen passed. Inside the grand sanctum, Guildmaster Valerius stared at the pile of death knight cores dumped onto his marble table. His hands trembled. 50 elite death knights, Valerius whispered, looking at Kaelen with absolute awe. An entire northern legion wiped out, and you lost almost none of your own mana. How is this possible, Saint? The light guided my blade, Guildmaster, Kaelen lied effortlessly, placing a hand over his heart. But I bring grave news. During the battle, I interrogated one of the dying demons using a holy compulsion spell. I learned who sent them. Valerius's eyes hardened. Who? Malachar, the third demon lord, Kaelen said, watching the guildmaster's reaction closely. He resides in the obsidian fortress in the northern Ashen Wastes. The demon confessed that Malachar sacrificed most of his personal guard to launch this attack. His fortress is currently underdefended. He is vulnerable, guildmaster. If we strike now, we can sever one of the heads of the abyss. Valerius paced the room, the heavy golden armor clanking with each step. A preemptive strike against a demon lord's fortress was madness. It had never been done successfully. But looking at the mountain of death knight cores, and looking at the serene, godlike confidence of the young saint before him, Valerius made a decision that would change history. I will authorize a holy crusade, Valerius declared, slamming his fist onto the table. I will grant you command of the First Crusade army, 10,000 paladins, clerics, and siege mages. You will march on the obsidian fortress, St. Kaelen. Bring me Malachar's head. Kaelen bowed deeply, hiding the wicked, ear-to-ear grin spreading across his face. Thy will be done. 3 days later, the Ashen Wastes trembled under the synchronized march of 10,000 heavily armored human soldiers. The First Crusade army was a terrifying sight. Massive siege engines imbued with holy magic rolled across the cracked earth, and a sea of golden banners flapped in the toxic wind. At the head of the army rode Kaelen. Jax rode up beside him, his massive greatsword resting on his shoulder. 10,000 zealots, Jax muttered softly so the nearby paladins couldn't hear. They actually think we're going to lead them to a glorious victory. They don't know you're using them as a battering ram, do they, boss? They are eager to die for their faith, Jax. Who am I to deny them? Kaelen replied smoothly. Alara is the infiltration route clear. Alara, whose shadow cloak was now dense enough to block out the sun around her, nodded. I scouted the perimeter using my shadow familiars. The main gate is heavily fortified with Malachar's remaining gargoyles and hellfire turrets. But the eastern drainage grate, it's exactly where you said it would be, completely unguarded. Of course it is, Kaelen smiled. I designed that fortress myself centuries ago. Malachar was always too stupid to check the architectural blueprints. In the distance, the towering, jagged spires of the obsidian fortress pierced the sky. The walls were black as pitch, glowing with veins of molten lava. Kaelen drew his holy sword and turned to the 10,000 paladins behind him. He injected his demonic aura into his vocal cords, converting it through Facade of the Saint into a booming, inspirational wave of holy command. Warriors of the light, Kaelen's voice echoed across the wastes, stirring the souls of the soldiers. Today, we do not fight for survival, we fight for eradication. Break their gates, shatter their walls, leave no demon alive, for the Empire. For the Saint, For the Empire! 10,000 voices roared back, a fanatical frenzy taking over the army. Kaelen pointed his sword at the fortress. Charge! The human army surged forward like a golden tidal wave. The fortress responded instantly. Hellfire rained from the battlements, incinerating dozens of paladins. Gargoyles swooped from the towers, tearing knights from their horses. The siege mages retaliated, launching massive spheres of holy light that crashed into the obsidian walls, cracking the stone. The chaos was absolute, the noise was deafening, it was a meat grinder. And right in the middle of it, Kaelen, Jax, Alara, and Thorn slipped away, completely unnoticed. While the First Crusade army died in droves at the front gates, keeping Malaker's entire defense force occupied, Kaelen led his squad through the eastern drainage grate. The shadows clung to them, masking their presence thanks to Alara's evolved magic. They moved through the damp, dark corridors of the fortress with terrifying precision. Any roaming demon guards were silently executed by Thorn's arrows before they could even sound an alarm. He's panicking, Kaelen observed, looking at the chaotic flow of mana in the fortress walls. He routed all internal security to the front gates. He truly believes the guildmaster sent the entire guild to kill him. Where is he? Thorn asked, his amber eyes scanning the darkness. The throne room. Highest spire, Kaelen said, his voice growing colder with every step. They ascended the spiraling obsidian staircases, encountering zero resistance. The sound of the massive siege outside became a muffled roar. Finally, they stood before a pair of towering, iron doors etched with screaming faces. Kaelen didn't bother opening them normally. He raised his foot and kicked the doors. The impact carried the raw physical strength of a level 50 demon king. The massive iron doors ripped off their hinges and flew across the room, crashing into the stone pillars. Inside the vast, dimly lit throne room, Malaker stood near a glowing teleportation circle. The third demon lord was packing artifacts into a spatial ring. He was abandoning his fortress. He was fleeing. Malaker whipped around, his massive, spiked armor clanking, drawing a blazing battle axe. When he saw Kaelen standing in the doorway, wearing the pristine white uniform of the Holy Guild, his jaw dropped. You, Malaker roared, a mix of rage and genuine terror in his voice. How did you get past the siege? My guards. Your guards are currently busy butchering 10,000 human zealots at the front gate, Kaelen said, stepping into the room. He casually tossed the holy iron sword he had been carrying onto the floor. It clattered loudly in the silence. Jax, Alara, and Thorn fanned out behind Kaelen, sealing the exit. Malaker gripped his axe, his demonic aura flaring, raising the temperature in the room to a blistering heat. So, you are the saint, the human anomaly. I admit, your tactics are impressive, but you made a fatal mistake coming into my throne room alone. I am a demon lord, you are nothing but a human child playing with light. Kaelen laughed. It was a dark, echoing, abyssal sound that made Malaker's blood run cold. Playing with light, Kaelen smiled. System, deactivate facade of the saint. Deactivating camouflage. Releasing demonic core inhibitors. The change was instantaneous. The blinding, pure holy light radiating from Kaelen vanished. In its place, a geyser of pitch-black, suffocating malice erupted from his body. The air pressure in the room became so heavy that the stone floor began to spiderweb with cracks. The temperature plummeted from boiling to freezing in a second. Malaker's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. He recognized that aura. It was an aura that had forced him to his knees for centuries. It was the aura of the absolute apex predator of the abyss. No, Malaker stumbled backward, dropping his battle axe. The weapon hit the floor with a dull thud. No, it's impossible. I killed you. We all killed you. I saw your core shatter. You saw what I allowed you to see, Malaker, Kaelen whispered, his voice resonating with ancient authority. His eyes glowed a vibrant, terrifying crimson. The pristine white uniform began to turn black, weaving into a dark, regal trench coat. I gave you a kingdom, Kaelen said, taking a slow step forward. I elevated you from a lowly imp to a lord, and you put a blade in my back because you were hungry for scraps. Am my king? Malaker fell to his knees, his massive frame trembling violently. The sheer instinctual terror of facing his former master paralyzed him. I was manipulated. The First Lord forced me. I beg for your mercy. Mercy? Kaelen tilted his head. I am a saint of the Holy Guild, Malakar. I don't give mercy to demons, I purge them. Malakar realized begging wouldn't work. In a desperate, animalistic frenzy, the demon lord roared, summoning a massive sphere of condensed hellfire, and hurled it directly at Kaelen at point-blank range. Die, Malakar screamed. Kaelen didn't move to dodge, he simply raised his hand. Domain expansion, Kaelen commanded quietly. Throne of Bones. Deploying domain, Throne of Bones. The world inverted. The throne room vanished, replaced by a massive, endless wasteland made entirely of skeletal remains. Malakar's hellfire sphere hit Kaelen, but it didn't even singe his clothes. The fire was instantly absorbed and neutralized by the overwhelming authority of the domain. Malakar found himself pinned to the ground by thousands of skeletal hands bursting from the bone-white earth. He struggled, roaring, but the grip was unbreakable. Kaelen walked slowly over the sea of bones, standing above the pinned demon lord. He reached his hand forward, his fingers forming into razor-sharp, obsidian claws. This is for the stab in the back, Malakar, Kaelen whispered, plunging his hand directly into the demon lord's chest. Malakar's agonizing scream echoed through the domain, shaking the very foundations of the abyss. Malakar's scream shattered the absolute silence of the bone wasteland. Kaelen's obsidian claws bypassed the heavy, cursed armor of the third demon lord as if it were made of paper. He gripped the pulsating, molten core resting in Malakar's chest. It was massive, 3 times the size of a normal demon's core, radiating the intense, suffocating heat of a volcano. You were always a coward, Malakar, Kaelen whispered, his voice echoing across the endless sea of skeletal remains. You never had the strength to look me in the eye when you killed me. You waited until I was exhausted from fighting the heavenly host. You waited until my back was turned. Mercy, Malakar choked, black blood bubbling from his lips. The mighty demon lord, who had commanded legions and terrified the human continent, was reduced to a weeping, pathetic mess. I already told you, Kaelen smiled, a terrifying expression that promised nothing but endless suffering. I don't do mercy anymore. Kaelen ripped his hand backward. A sickening crunch echoed through the domain as Kaelen violently extracted the demon lord's core. Malakar's eyes rolled back into his head, his massive body instantly going limp. Without its core, the demon's physical form began to rapidly disintegrate, turning into a pile of gray ash that scattered across the bone-white earth. Kaelen stood alone, holding the blazing core. It was so hot it would have melted a normal human's bones, but to Kaelen, it felt like a warm hearth. Target slain, Malakar, the third demon lord. Massive EXP gained. Level up. Level up. Level up. Current level, 75. Without hesitation, Kaelen brought the core to his mouth and crushed it between his teeth, swallowing the molten essence whole. The reaction was explosive. Consuming Lord-class demonic core. Warning, energy overload imminent. Rerouting excess mana to sealed pathways. Seal 1 of 5 broken. Demonic authority partially restored. Skill acquired. Hellfire Monarch, passive, complete immunity to fire-based attacks, ability to conjure absolute black flame. Skill acquired. Legion Commander, active, authority to resurrect fallen demons as shadow vassals. Kaelen threw his head back and laughed. The raw power coursing through his veins was intoxicating. He was only at a fraction of his past life peak, but with the system unlocking his seals, he was growing exponentially faster than he ever had before. He snapped his fingers, and the Throne of Bones domain shattered like glass, returning him to the dimly lit throne room of the Obsidian Fortress. Jax, Alara, and Thorn were waiting by the door. Even though they had consumed high-tier cores themselves, they still flinched and took a step back as Kaelen reappeared. The sheer density of his aura, fresh from devouring a demon lord, was physically suffocating. Captain, Alara gasped, struggling to breathe under the pressure. The battle outside. The human army has breached the inner courtyard. Kaelen instantly reeled in his aura. System, reactivate Facade of the Saint. Activating camouflage. The suffocating black malice vanished, instantly replaced by the warm, blinding, pure golden light of the saint. Kaelen picked up his holy iron sword from the floor, wiped a smudge of dirt off his pristine white uniform, and looked at his squad. "The vault is beneath the throne," Kaelen ordered, pointing to a hidden trapdoor. "Loot everything. Artifacts, gold, skill books, high-tier cores. Stuff it all into spatial rings and keep it hidden. By the time the guild gets here, I want this fortress picked completely clean. Consider it your hazard pay." Jax grinned, his massive greatsword resting on his shoulder. "Now you're speaking my language, boss." The three outcasts scrambled into the vault. Kaelen bent down and picked up the only thing remaining of the third demon lord, Malaker's severed, horned head, which had rolled away before the body turned to ash. The heavy iron doors of the throne room were suddenly blasted inward by a massive volley of holy magic. Through the smoke and rubble charged the remnants of the First Crusade army. Of the 10,000 paladins who had marched on the fortress, barely 6,000 remained. They were battered, bleeding, their golden armor scorched and dented, but their eyes burned with fanatical zeal. Commander Kaelig, who had somehow survived the slaughter at the front gate despite missing an arm, led the charge, his sword raised high. For the saint, purge the demon lord. But as the smoke cleared, the charging army skidded to a dead halt. They expected a brutal, room-shaking boss battle. They expected to find their saint locked in a desperate struggle against a towering monster. Instead, they found Kaelen standing perfectly still in the center of the room. He was completely unharmed, not a single drop of sweat on his brow, his uniform glowing with divine radiance. In his left hand, he held his holy sword. In his right hand, he held the severed head of Malaker by its horns. Dead silence fell over the 6,000 surviving paladins. Kaelen slowly raised the severed head of the demon lord, so the entire army could see it. "The third lord has fallen?" Kaelen's voice echoed through the massive chamber, amplified by his subtle demonic compulsion magic. "The abyss has been broken. The light is victorious." For a moment, nobody moved. The sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing broke their minds. A single man had bypassed the entire siege and executed a demon lord in single combat. Then Commander Kaelig dropped his sword. It clattered loudly against the stone floor. Kaelig fell to his knees, tears streaming down his soot-covered face. "Praise the light," Kaelig wept loudly. It was like a dam breaking. 6,000 hardened veterans, men who had just watched their brothers die in a horrific meat grinder, fell to their knees in unison. They slammed their fists against their breastplates, creating a deafening, metallic chorus of absolute worship. Praise the saint of the sword," the army chanted, the sound shaking the very foundations of the fortress. Kaelen looked out over the sea of kneeling zealots. He looked at the severed head of his betrayer in his hand. And then he looked toward the hidden vault, where his elite, demonic squad was currently looting the wealth of an empire. Yes, Kaelen thought, a truly sinister smile hidden behind his holy facade. Worship me, bleed for me, die for me. He had done it. He had successfully weaponized his greatest enemies. The Holy Guild, the most powerful human military force in the world, was now completely and utterly under his absolute control. They believed he was their savior. They believed he was the ultimate weapon of the goddess. They had no idea they had just crowned the true demon king. Kaelen raised his holy sword to the heavens. "This is only the beginning. Today we took their fortress. Tomorrow we march on the rest. We will not stop until every demon lord is erased from this earth." The army roared in fanatical agreement, ready to march straight into hell if Kaelen asked them to. "The first lord, the second lord, the fourth lord," Kaelen whispered under his breath, his crimson eyes flashing dangerously behind the golden light. "I'm coming for all of you, and I'm bringing heaven and hell with me." And that is where we are going to end this massive, epic first part of The Demon King Plays the Hero. Kaelen has successfully infiltrated the Holy Guild, unlocked a terrifying domain, slaughtered his first betrayer, and manipulated 10,000 paladins into becoming his personal, fanatical army. But the other 3 demon lords are still out there, and when they find out Malaker was executed by a saint, the real war for the abyss will begin. If you loved this Zero to Hero, overpowered revenge epic, you absolutely have to smash that like button right now. it tells me you want to see the continuation of Kaelen's Dark Crusade. If you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2, where Kaelen will have to face the First Lord's elite Heavenly Guard. Drop a comment down below. What did you think of Kaelen's diabolical strategy? Did he cross the line at Fort Solis, or is it perfectly justified revenge? Let me know. Thank you so much for hanging out in the Fate Library today. Keep reading, keep leveling up, and I will see you all in the next epic recap.